Hi, everybody. This is Farha, and I always like to do conversations with really engaged people and community leaders. The topic is about vouchers and what's happening in Austin in the Texas Legislature. I'm so happy to have here Jacey Jetton. How are you, Jacey?
Doing good. I'm glad to be here with you, and definitely excited to talk about this important issue. It's one that I've pushed for and been an advocate of for the last two sessions, and I think there's good possibility something comes through this time around, and I think it'll be good for Texas students. And also, you're going to go ahead and throw it out there now. I have two kids in public schools, and I very much am in favor of public education as well.
Okay, that's good to know. And then, obviously, for those who may not know him, you did serve as state rep for quite a few terms, and so you've been in Austin. You've been through these fights and these discussions and issues. I don't think this was ever nothing similar like this was passed when you were in Austin, correct?
No, I think the closest thing that we did get through, and we renamed it, but it's that parent-directed special education services fund, where a public education student that has special needs can get an additional $1,500. We call it education savings accounts, but it's basically funds that are available for a student to go and get additional services to help supplement their public education, what they're getting at their school.
Okay,
So
so that
that'd
was
be
for
the closest thing, though.
yeah, that was the special needs, and that was passed. And is there any, now we're going to move to the main issue of SB2, but is
Sure.
there any data of how successful or unsuccessful that was just to look at it? Like, did parents have access to it? And
Yeah, so this was done, it was largely done in response to COVID. And so, especially those special needs children during COVID, they were impacted quite a bit. And so we created this fund in 2021, and we thought we had adequate funding in there, and it was wiped out almost immediately. And so now we have, I think this last session, I think we more than doubled it. And again, it's just highly in demand. Unfortunately, most of the public schools right now aren't able to find enough teachers, special ed teachers, and the services to provide all the services for our sped students. And this was an opportunity for parents to go out and get additional, and they're taking advantage of it.
okay, so you saw that there was a great need for that. So just in hindsight, like in 2023, from what I've read, is $7 billion was kind of set aside for education issues, including teacher pay raises. But what happened is, like, I guess the ruling party or the governor, the lieutenant governor, kind of said, "Look, unless we get vouchers also on the table, we're not going to release those funds." So I know there were a lot of people. Obviously, I'm taking the position that we were very unhappy that teachers didn't get their pay raise 2 years ago. There's a push for teachers now to get a pay raise, which looks like it could happen. But I'm also with the perspective of these voucher programs or educational savings account are not really helping the main problem of public education. But I know that you have a different view of that. And I'm calling it like a Band-Aid, and I know you have a different opinion of that. But in your point, what is the main idea of the ESA or the vouchers? Why you think like this is going to help Texas kids? It may not be everything that you want in it, but it's going to be helpful.
Right. And so I really want to point out first, during the regular session of 2023, there was an increase in the amount of spending given towards public education. There was an additional 7 billion that was talked about, and that was tied to the passage of the education savings account bill. It was done because there was a lot of what I would argue is largely inaccurate perceptions of what would happen if education savings account went into effect. And if those things went into effect, the whole thing would have been devastated. And so the deal was, all right, let's say there's some truth to what you were saying, that the system will be devastated, underfunded, whatever. Here's an additional 7 billion to go in to help supplement that then. And so that's the first thing I want to kind of point out when it comes to some of that funding. The other part is when it comes to teacher pay raises, it's your school districts that determine how much your teachers are getting paid in your schools. That's why there's different pays in Fort Bend ISD, LCISD, HISD, and so forth, is because each school district gets to decide. Unfortunately, the school district doesn't always give those funds to teacher pay raises. And therefore, the Texas Legislature has to go in there and say, all right, we're going to give you this increase. And hey, school district, you can't go and divert those funds for something else. You're giving it for teacher pay raises. And so that is something that the governor has again put as an emergency item. And so, the education savings accounts is very much an emergency item, but so is teacher pay raises and trade and career training. And so,
So it's going
so
to happen. Teachers are going to get their pay raise. It does look like the voucher or ESA is going to be passed. But there's a lot of detractors saying, like, look, it's kind of the only people that can really take advantage are those who are either already sending their kids to private school, or those who can afford private school. I know there's a study that says the average tuition is about 10,000, and that's like the amount that would be given to available to every parent. A little bit extra for those with special needs kids would be given more money than 10,000, and the money can be used, I'm told, like not just for private school but also supplemental
Dashboard here.
teaching, tuition, and things like
Changes,
that.
new bills filed, new bill versions, and new.
sorry, I was talking in the background.
Yeah, no problem. That happens. And
Yeah,
so you can use the money for other things, but the idea is like if I'm a parent and I'm happy with my public school education for my kids, I can't use that money to give it back to public education and to supplement whatever they need to help the teachers in the classroom get supplies or whatever. It's really if I'm willing to leave public education. I think that's the oxymoron is it is public funds, it's general revenue funds, my hard-earned tax dollars from sales tax mostly. And for people need to know, like for school districts, we use the property tax formula to fund an amount per student for public schools. And I think the idea is like if you keep using public money to kind of take people away from public school, you're going to diminish the public school ability to get those funds based on attendance. And I know you had an answer for that, which is we could mitigate that a little bit. But it's kind of like nobody wants to fix the public school system first. And by the way, you don't have to be in a failing school district to take that money. You could be in a wonderful school district that's doing all the right things and still take that money. So it's not even really connected to those in need. And then there's also the issue about rural schools not having a true choice. Everything is about choice, but more than half of the counties don't have, or districts don't have a private school option to even use that money in a fair, effective way. And I'd like to hear some of your responses.
sure. Yeah, there was a lot there. And so I think what I'd like to do is, so Senate Bill 2 is Creighton's bill. This is the bill that's coming out of that was passed out of the Senate already. They fast tracked it out of the Senate. It's going to the House now. I think it'll get amended. Well, it got amended a little bit in the Senate, and it'll likely get amended more in the House, and there'll be a conference committee. And so we'll know more of what the final outcomes of that bill looks like in the coming months. But I mean, just some of the realities of the bill. It's the number of students that can take advantage of it is tied to appropriation. And so they're talking about appropriating, it's $1 billion for 100,000 students to participate. That's an average about $10,000 per student taking advantage of it. And so you get to 1 billion. $10,000 is what they're projecting to spend per child. It's an education savings account, and so we're not talking about giving $10,000 to a parent. The comptroller's office would audit, ensure that the funds they're going to have a list of licensed and these do have to be licensed private schools. They have to be so there'll be approved vendor list where these funds can go to pay for the education. we're talking about $10,000 on average with an average. The private school association, they're saying that the average private school tuition in Texas right now is $9,831, which means there are some higher, and we hear a lot about the higher ones, but then there's also some lower, right? How you get to the average of 9,831. So 10,000 would provide an opportunity for a good chunk of students to be able to potentially go to a private school near them. They're talking about an additional $1,500 that would be supplied for special ed students to be able to get additional services at the private school. And so when you talk about all that, so we're talking about limitations, we're talking about 80% of the funding of those funds have to go to families with special needs children or other or those under earning under 500% of the poverty line, the family poverty line. And then also, what are my notes here say?
So you're saying, okay, so you're saying that this is not just given to every parent, but 80% of that $1 billion has to go to a parent that has really special circumstances like poverty issues or special needs or some kind of disability. The other 20% could be anybody then.
Right. And so, but it's a lottery system. And so you're having to prioritize. And so at least 80%, if there are 100% of, if there are 100,000 students that meet that criteria, they're prioritized, they're the ones getting the funds. Okay. And so that's a big part of it. The other part of it is, this is only going to be available to students that have spent at least 90% of the prior academic school year in a public school. And so if you're already sending your child to a private school, you don't qualify.
Okay, or homeschool.
Opportunity.
Yeah, or homeschool.
Or homeschool. Private school or homeschool. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and in Texas, we consider public school or private schools and homeschools the same. They have the same standing in the state. And so, but I think those are important points because they're not, usually the argument is that, oh, these are going to funds that, students that are already in private school. Well, if the parent can already afford it, that's not who we're trying to provide this for. The whole idea behind the education savings account is for those students that need either special academic services or they're in some sort of situation. And you brought up they're not all in low performing schools. Well, sometimes you have a child that goes to a really good school, but they have a bullying situation, or they have some other situation that, and really what got me started on the ESA road was a friend of mine who had a child that was attending a middle school in my area, where a child, because of it was considered a manifestation of their disorder, they have their special needs, and they have a behavioral issue, and they just walked on the bus and just punched the kid in the face. And because it was a manifestation of his disorder and all the protections we have in place, that child continued to be at the same lunchroom table and continued to be in the same classroom as the student. Well, obviously the child was traumatized and the parent had to go and get another job so that she could pay for her child to go to a private school. Well, these private schools right now are available for the wealthy. They're available for the people that have the means to pay for it. There's a lot of parents that don't have the means to pay for it. And we shouldn't have this idea that out of the 5.5 million kids we have in the state of Texas, the thousands and thousands of schools and the thousands and thousands of classrooms, that every child is going to get the perfect and best fit education they can in that exact classroom that they are zoned to because of their location. And that is why we are pursuing education savings account in the state of Texas. Every state that has tried to implement an ESA has heard the exact same arguments of doom and gloom beforehand. And now you have 20 some odd states around the country that have implemented this and is popular with parents that need to use it. And it hasn't devastated the school systems in any of those locations.
So you're saying that if you send your child to public school and you want them to stay in public school, but you need like supplemental help because of their special needs nature or some disability or something else, you could still apply for this $10,000.
So no, it would still be available under the other program that we created, which was the parent-directed special education services.
But this $10,000 is really not available to someone that decides to keep their child enrolled.
No, it's not. It comes from a different fund, and also, the average student in the state of Texas, between their local property taxes, the state funding and federal funding, is getting funded at about $12,000 to $13,000 per student in the state of Texas. And so we're not talking about even saying that they're getting the same amount at any of the private schools around the state. We're saying that, hey, private schools, if you want to send your student to a private school, you will get a fraction of the amount that we provide for our public school students, and private schools will just have to be efficient to meet those needs within that price range. It's just like charter schools right now, though. There are a lot of parents that feel that they're not getting the education they desire out of their ISD, and they are sending their child to charter schools. And there are more people on the wait list for charter school than there are charter schools. And so there is a desire in the marketplace. There are parents that strongly desire the opportunity to send their child somewhere else, and financial means shouldn't be the barrier to that.
And I think people have, understand the historical basis of really making sure we have a strong public school system. It is a school system that really can't reject children, as opposed to maybe charter schools or private schools. You can say no to kids. And I think that there's a heavy burden placed on public schools. And I think the lack of funding and attention to really prop up and improve public schools and try to find these alternatives, which are great quick fixes for parents. Maybe this is a great alternative because you can make a decision like that within a school year. For public schools, I mean, they really have to budget and look for funds, and they still have to pay for maintenance and operation as they see their student population dropping, going maybe into charter schools, and now private schools are being incentivized. So I think there's still that feeling that people are being incentivized to leave public schools for any reason. You don't have to leave public school for a specific reason. And that really diminishes the ability of this public school to maintain its funding. And it's never popular to do these bonds and you have to raise the interest rate to recapture your extra revenue if you're one of those districts. It gets very, very political and very, very messy for public school system. And they really want to be the first priority. And why is there not this focus on let's make our public school system really strong? And then the afterthought should be, look, do we have other alternatives? But our public school system seems to be just getting dings. I mean, that's the perception, is that having these alternatives actually hurt prioritizing public school systems.
Well, you made some good points, and there are points that have been brought up quite a bit. And I think there's a few things to talk about there. The first is, as it stands today, people are moving not always because of schools, and sometimes because of schools. They're moving from one location to another to get from one school district to another school district. And when that child moves, the funding goes with it. And so we're seeing that in parts of Sugar Land and within Fort Bend ISD, where I think we have about a dozen schools that are underutilized right now. It's not because of ESAs. ESAs haven't been implemented yet. These schools were built, bonds were passed, people are paying, a lot of times still paying into the construction of those schools, but because of economic reasons, because of all different types of reasons, people are moving. And so you end up with underutilized schools. School board members have very difficult jobs, and I have a lot of respect for school board members. I appreciate the work that, I know a lot of the school board members on LCISD, Fort Bend ISD, and a lot of the ones around here. And they do the hard work, and it's not always easy to tell a community that, hey, you're likely going to lose your community school, your neighborhood school, because people are moving. But if we're good stewards of the funds that we're provided, we have to make those hard decisions. And so that's one part of it. People are already moving, schools are already getting underutilized. This ends up eating into school budgets. It already exists. We don't like it, but school board members have a duty to make sure that when schools become underutilized, you do have to close. You have to move students around. The other point I want to make in this is, so we fund students about $12,000-$13,000 per student in the state of Texas. In California, in other states, it gets up to around $20,000 per student. Even in those areas, you still have students that end up taking advantage of charter schools, private schools, home schools, moving to different areas for better schools. I guess the first thing is, and we've asked this, what's the magic number? How much do we have to spend to be able to get 5.5 million students the absolute best quality opportunity education in the state? And I don't know that there's a number. With the thousands and thousands of classrooms and thousands of teachers and thousands of superintendents and thousands of school board members, the idea that we can have the exact situation in every classroom for every unique situation of every child is it's unreasonable. And so if it's unreasonable, then we have to accept the fact that there has to be other options. And the marketplace allows for these other options. If your child has a specific need, if your child has a specific situation, then there should be another option for them. And that option right now is only available for the wealthy. And this levels the playing field so that every child in Texas has an opportunity at the best education. And I'll throw out one last one because I know the rural areas are the ones that are most scared about this. And you're right. There's not a private school for them to go to. And therefore, the funding doesn't change for their schools. It's based on the number of students in the classroom. If the students don't have anywhere else to go to, they're stuck there. And their funding remains the same. And actually we're talking about adding, substantially more to teacher pay raises. It wouldn't surprise me the basic allotment gets adjusted. The basic allotment is usually what gets pointed at, but there's actually a lot of different levers within that funding formula that gets adjusted. We have increased those other areas of the funding formula. But those don't change for those schools. And so they continue to get the funding that they need. Fair equal as with every other area of the state. Actually, I take that back. Rural areas get more per student than urban areas do because of the maintenance and operations and evening out so that your student actual classroom funding per student ends up staying the same.
Correct. And I think there's something in the bill or proposed amendments to the bill, maybe in the House, is more funding for teachers in rural areas. So they get like a little bit more in terms of adding to their salary. But public education is a difficult thing to struggle with the funding part. It always has been, and we've tried to make it fair and equitable, and everyone has a fair shot to get the same quality education all over the state, no matter where they live. And all kids, regardless of their ability or disability, get the same quality education. And I really hope it works out. I hope that the House finds some amendments to kind of make it a better bill, but it looks like the votes are there to pass it. Do you feel like there might be some more improved amendments that also address, or maybe other bills or other things that address the public school system and not just focusing on ESA? Do you think this starts a better discussion to really focus on public school system?
I think it changes the conversation once it happens. The big question is, in my opinion, I've filed multiple bills when it comes to education savings accounts. I think there are things that we could do to the bill to probably make it better. It all revolves around education savings accounts and making sure that the funding gets to the children that need it the most. But also, I had a special education funding bill that would have created a priority of services. That's what we call it. It was funding mechanism based on the amount of services that a SPED student receives versus a flat rate, which is what's given right now, and that layers of services that are provided, the more services, the more funding that they get. Well, I think that in that case, that should also be applied to the education savings account because there are additional service required for special education students. Sometimes, we're spending up to $30,000 to $100,000 in an academic year for special education child because they have very specific needs. And
Right.
we do need to make sure that we're providing that adequately. And that is a bill that I hope does pass, at least on its own, dealing with school funding. It'll impact the SHARS, the loss in SHARS funding if they did it based on the number of services, if the state funded based on the number of services provided. And just adding in again, IDEA and everything, it's all federal requirements that the federal government has never funded and the state has continued to have to make up for.
Yeah.
And so,
There's a
and
lot of
I don't see the federal government spending more on education either, so.
if there's one thing, and we'll close it out. I got to thank you for just engaging in this conversation with me, and I hope that when we talk to elected leaders, community leaders, influencers, that they will have this open discussion as you've had with us. Um, so one thing, if there's one thing that you would want to do to kind of improve public education, what's the one idea, program, legislation that we say, Farha, this is something that really should be looked at. It'll help make it better. I get it that one piece of legislation can't fix everything, but what's the
Sure.
one thing that you would, if it was on your wish list?
My wish list, the thing that I wish I accomplished was making closing off a lot of the bureaucracy at the top so that much more funds made it all the way to the classroom. When you think about, 12 students, 10 students in a classroom getting 12,000 each, the amount of funds per classroom, does the quality of materials, does the salary of the teacher, does all that is that all reflected in the 120,000 that you receive in that classroom? I don't think so. I think that we should be able to pay more, see a lot better curriculum and materials in the classroom if more funds made it all the way down. I think we've created a lot of layers to our public education system. And if we were to shrink that down and get more of those funds to the classroom, I really think we see a game changer. And this is a lot of what happens when you start pouring more and more money into public education. It bloats at the top, and you don't see it in the classroom. And this has been one of my biggest frustrations. And
And you're talking about when you say the bureaucracy, you're talking about like above the teacher level or
above
above
the
the
teacher
principal
level,
level, maybe.
yes. And
Okay.
so it frustrates me to go to administrative buildings for school districts that are just massive towers with all full of staff. Could we get rid of half that staff and give teachers pay raises? I think we could. And I think that would greatly impact the quality of teachers that we're able to attract and the amount of, the quality of training instruction we receive in the classrooms. So,
I think everyone should be supportive of efficiencies because that's what our students, when they graduate into this new world, that's one of the talent and skills they need to have in jobs
yeah.
is how to make it more cost efficient or time efficient and using technology. I appreciate so much. Thank you,
But,
JC, for your time.
yeah,
And
I do want to add one more
sure.
thing because I think it's important, especially as you engage the legislature this session. I think it's easy. This topic has become so polarizing that it appears to be, private schools versus public schools. And I think it's really important to recognize that the majority of the people in the legislature are much more interested in the child here in Texas. They're supportive of private schools. They're also very supportive of public schools. They're very supportive of public school teachers. And we all recognize this is the main avenue that 99% of students are going to go through our public education system. We need to make sure that it works and is effective and prepares our children for the future. But we also know that there needs to be alternatives for those that need the alternative. And so it's not all polarizing,
Yeah.
especially in the legislature. When you get down there, if you look for it, you're going to recognize that they're interested in both succeeding. It's not one or the other.
Right. And I think the public also, I think the public wants to see the public school system as a priority, but the way it's perceived and maybe the way it's discussed, there's a lot of attention given to these alternatives for a good reason also, because like, okay, can we fix the house before we work on the garden or the garage or the front yard? And I think that's what the public really wants to see this public school system to be stellar. And I think in the rankings of public school system with other states, we don't always fare very well. And I think that's very concerning. We have a great state. It's amazingly diverse. It's got an economic strong basis. We always wonder why we don't have more Ivy League schools in Texas because of what we have, and we're the energy capital, the revenue capital for all of that. We have the money to do this.
Sure.
But
Yeah,
thank you
no,
again.
absolutely.
Thank you again, JC. I appreciate it. And I'm sure there'll be people might reach out to you to get more details. You've always made yourself accessible, and it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Anytime.